What causes sadness? Well, within the time period of EU4, the Industrial Revolution hasn't been invented yet, which has some impact on society. One of these impacts is that things like disease absolutely ravage populations, which contributes to sadness. And a lot of people are probably sad while they starve to death. This can occur when a harvest fails, or the Ottomans or something of that nature go ahead and full occupy your country again. Speaking of things causing sadness, what was the poverty rate in 15th century Europe? Oh, I see, that probably doesn't help matters either. But every cloud has a silver lining, which means that the convenient part about these types of sadness is, as the player, you don't actually ever get informed about those things happening. And if you do, it's usually through one of those events that no one reads anyway. This means that, much like the moon, when you aren't looking at it, it goes away. However, there is one type of sadness that still occurs, which the player is exposed to. When your troops fight, sometimes they don't do it until the very end. This is because sometimes one of the two sides run out of morale. Happiness. Now, I already stacked morale a while back, but the issue I found with that strategy is that whenever you ended up losing your morale from fighting other people or rebels or simply not paying for your troops, they ended up sad. This is quite unavoidable unless you want to not use your troops, in which case you as the player are sad because you're not using your army. As such, my approach today is going to be getting the highest value possible of morale recovery. That way, even if they dip below 100%, all I have to do is wait for a month, and then that problem will literally go away on its own. If I'm able to get the morale recovery rate to 100%, that is. This means that we will be free from suffering and from sadness, as long as we're ready to wait 1 month for that sadness and suffering to go away. And I will count that as an absolute win. So, disclaimers, the 3-second rundown of morale recovery at its base level is that you recover 15% of your total morale, which is buffed up to 20% if you happen to be at your province. Any buffs to morale recovery increase this rate. As such, today we'll be getting the counter in a bit. It's going to be starting at 15% already, since we're going to be assuming this base level of morale recovery is going to occur, as it's not really possible to decrease it from that point. Otherwise, the rest of the disclaimer section is pretty simple. We're going to be taking into account the usual restrictions, no custom nations, Iron Man and achievement compatibility will be enabled. With that said, however, let's get into the game proper. Okay, here we are. Now, we are going to have a lot of options for our final end tag today in our run, as the only requirement we already have from our end tag is going to be that they have 10% morale recovery in their ideas. This is a bit of an unusual situation, as far as I'm aware, there is no permanent source of morale recovery in anyone's either events or missions associated with that country that last until the end of the game. And as you can tell by the counter visible now, we're only again going to be looking at permanent sources of morale recovery, as temporarily solving happiness isn't really a solution if it just expires later. We want to be permanently recovering to 100% happiness all the time. This does mean that, again, we have this choice of end tag that we need to contest with, which means that usually I would recommend something like Hungary. Hungary rather famously, as in within the multiplayer community naturally, starts with 10% recover army morale speed as well as some cavalry combat ability. Now, Hungary is the classic example of this, but with domination there's a couple new countries that have gained access to recovery army morale speed. Persia gains access to 10% as well as Armenia. Unfortunately, both of those tags do not have exist at the game start. There's also other options that are less flashy than those two, but again, a couple countries have 10% morale recovery rate, and these are the ones that you want to be looking at for your end tags. For the sake of this demonstration, however, I'm going to be sticking with Hungary, as they have the 10% morale recovery rate right at the start, and we don't have to worry about any tag switches in terms of our ideas, at least for the foreseeable future. So, the counter's there, and before we get into the proper video, I'm not the only one with a counter today. You also have access to 2 counters, both the like button counter and the sub button counter, and if you want to increase those, that'll be very much appreciated. With that all being said and done, however, time to get into the video proper. So, before we get any further, what is the big culture switch that we need to do? Unfortunately, this is going to be pretty much the most complicated part of the run. Thankfully, it can be done much later in the game, although it definitely gets harder the later you attempt to do it, because you need to go ahead and switch your primary culture to Korean. Now, switching to Korean as Hungary is by no means an easy ask, however it's going to be the only super challenging part of this run as far as I know. Now, to be clear, there are other sources of army recovery rate that do not involve becoming Korean. My issue is those are either temporary or only applying to a local part of your army. For example, a 10% morale recovery rate general is great, but A, not going to be applied to your army, and B, it tends to be quite temporary. The same can be said for other missions that can give you access to army recovery rate. There's really not that many of them, and all of them are temporary as far as I know. The one exception to this mission that gives you recovery rate is going to be the Ethiopian mission for their Kawa unique units. The issue with that mission is that it's only going to apply to their Kawa units, and switching into the Ethiopian culture group as someone like the Hungarians isn't exactly that much easier than switching into Korean anyway. With all that being said and done, why have we done all this? Well, it's for a couple government reforms. Well, more specifically, just the one government reform. At tier 5, we'll need to take the Righteous Army, which is going to bump up our recovery army morale speed from 15% all the way up to 30%, which is going to work quite well with our national ideas, again, which are giving us an extra 10%, meaning we'll already be looking at a 40% recover army morale speed rate. Next, go ahead and grab your army tradition to 100. Among other things, it's going to increase your recover army morale speed by 10% at 100, which you can put onto the counter now. It's also quite good as it gives you access to an extra 25 morale, as well as some manpower recovery speed, some extra siege ability, and makes your nobility a bit happier. Now, let's talk ideas. We're going to need 7 ideas for this run, not all 8, and weirdly enough, one of those is the placeholder as well, just to let us take an extra mill idea group. So let's get into them now. And I would suggest going ahead and opening with Administrative for the early core creation cost reduction. However, this isn't necessary. The order you take these in doesn't really matter here. Next, you need to go ahead and take Offensive, which includes 10% recovery army morale speed, which is already bringing up our counter quite to an impressive margin. However, after this, you need to go ahead and take Defensive idea, which will also help you reinforce things faster. But that's not the reason we're taking them for a policy. And after this, we now need to take a bit of an oddball idea group that is going to be a bit hard to justify as a country like Hungary. We need to go ahead and grab expansion ideas. Now, the only thing you can really use out of the expansion ideas is an extra diplomat, but at least there is one unique thing going for it. You have minimum autonomy reduction in territories, which is going to make your trade companies a bit better. However, as Hungary, you're also going to struggle getting into trade companies, so this is going to be a really drain idea group on for you, so feel free to take it later. However, expansion ideas is going to be quite nice for a second build that I'll be going over to doing the same thing, which I find at least makes up for it slightly. Anyway, after expansion ideas, go ahead and grab mercenary ideas, followed by any idea group you want. I've taken innovative here because I know I'll be running 3 policies, so it's going to save me a mill point a month, and also has some tech cost reductions and other things. Again, however, this is, I wouldn't even say it's a suggestion, just take any admin or dip group. Another suggestion here would be trade if you need more money, or diplomatic if you want to go ahead and conquer more land. However, finally you need to go ahead and finish off with quality, which will help you maintain your army tradition, but more importantly give you access to the policies. The policies in question you need to go ahead and grab are Hide Expeditions Act for 15 recover army morale speed. It also comes with free force march, which is quite nice. Local army organization for a decrease in regiment costs and 15 more recover army morale speed. And finally the Liquor Act, which is going to increase the reinforcement speed by 15%, but more importantly increase the recover army morale speed by 15% as well. This is going to give you a recovery army morale speed of actually over 100%, meaning that we don't need to maintain 100 army tradition. You just need to keep it at around 50, which should be quite doable if you're fighting a lot, or invest into forts, or do things of that nature. However, it's not strictly speaking covered in this run, and there aren't other things to help you with it. Anyway, to demonstrate it, here I have some troops that are pretty low on morale. They have 0.51 morale, and they're going to recover all of it every month. Now, they're also on a controlled province, which makes this a bit easier for us, but if we do pay for our troops, we're going to see that they start at 0.51, and they're about to recover 7.87 morale out of 7.16 on the month take. So if we were to just patiently wait for that, there we go, we recover all of our morale every single month. This is incredibly amazing for trolling AI, as the AI will see your low morale and try and attack you with much lower troops, at which point you'll be able to just recover all of it, even in enemy territory, back to 100%, leading to a lot of easy stack wipes and AI trolling. This is of course quite harsh, since the AI isn't particularly good anyway, so you don't need to troll them, but it's something you definitely can do. However, let's now talk about a more different, interesting approach of this build. So you can go ahead and form Persia, which is going to give you new traditions and ambitions, which you do want to take, but more importantly is going to give you an extra 10% manpower recovery army morale speed in your finishes, the same as the Hungarians. Now with Persia you can do the entire same build as before with the idea groups, but it's going to be a bit more useful now. Now, with Persia, what's interesting is you have a lot of access to good areas of the world that you can actually trade company. Namely, you can trade company in India, and the 10% autonomy territories will be useful there, and naturally you can go ahead and trade company, well, everything outside of the Persia area, which is quite a lot of the map. The Tartary area, Eastern Europe, the Levant, pretty much anywhere that you choose to expand to. Unlike Hungary, you can trade company. Now, Hungary, of course, does also have a similar option. Being part of Eastern Europe and having its capital there, it can technically start trade company into Western Europe. The issue is that's a lot of nice land you don't want to trade company. The argument can, of course, still be made in the same way for the Levant and India, that's good land you don't want to be trade company. But I find an Indian trade company tends to perform better than something like a Vienna trade company, from my personal experience. And hence I would suggest this build as Persia, or at least anyone who can form Persia. You also have a bit of an easier access into going to the Hungarian Korea provinces that we have here, so you can go ahead and become Korean for the reforms in question. So if you are planning to do it at home, as it were, I would suggest you do it as something as a Persia run, as this will give you a bit of a unique Persia run where you're getting a bit of a modifier stack, while also able to pick up a bunch of achievements for the new Persia and check out the new Persia content if you haven't already. With that being said and done, that's going to be it for the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.